All right, we're letting a few more people in. Good morning,
Yeah, everybody
everyone.
mute yourselves if you can.
Okay.
But we're not going to mute ourselves.
Oh no.
Oh, wait, I got to get my,
Amy and Kathy, mashed potato gravy in full force.
hold on, I got to get my, I should have done all of this a little bit earlier.
Come on, Kathy.
Yeah, really. They don't do this in podcasts.
Why you're comparing a lot of this to podcasts today? I'm not quite sure what's happening.
Because I listen to podcasts to see how they kind of run, their intro, outro, and during-tro patter, and it's mind-boggling, like how.
Hold on, we should have, every time we say something that's witty, we should just put music behind it suddenly.
We don't know how to do that, Amy.
Don't worry. This is only level 1 of this, what we do.
Level 1. I'm too old to go back to school again.
Level 1.
No.
Level 1 Zoom.
All right, we're going to get started, yeah?
All right, and we're going to try something new today. And I'm
okay, so you can all dance if you want. If you don't want to dance, it's totally okay.
Oh, God, Heidi's here.
Uh-oh.
Thank God.
Helen's going. There's no music and Helen's going. Suzanne's getting ready.
Yep.
I see. Uh-oh, it's the interpretive intro from Suzanne.
Susan Cooper has got a smile to it because, sometimes I think we freak you out, Susan.
Yeah, we are really highly trained professionals, okay? I just want you to know that.
We do have a serious side.
All right, Amy.
All right. All right, let's see how it goes.
Oh, right. Man, I'm laughing already.
Okay.
Well, it's the end of the week. Now where you been? Well, now it's Feedback Friday, so come on in. Come sit down and stare at your screen. We've got.
I can't hear it. We don't hear the music, Amy.
She muted herself.
You muted yourself. Unmute yourself.
All day long.
Feedback, feedback, Feedback Friday.
Welcome, everyone. Hey, Amy, you can't mute yourself in the middle of that because we couldn't hear it.
Oh, really?
Yes, really.
Hey, we learned in real time, didn't we?
That's right. Okay, sound lesson number 10. Don't mute yourself if you're playing the music.
Right.
All right.
Now we know.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedback Friday. It is episode 24?
24.
24. We are here. It's Friday. It's the smoke apocalypse has descended on us. We got an APB yesterday, like an emergency broadcast that this massive smoke plume is descending on the Puget Sound area. Helen, you must have that too, right? And Cheryl?
It's terrible here.
Yeah.
It's like over 200.
Oh, really? I think
really
ours is supposed to get about 140, so maybe we're better.
This is really bad.
But yeah, those of you with allergies, asthma, that kind of thing, just keep that little inhaler close by because it's just a little uncomfortable today.
You know that mask we wear for dying? I'm supposed to be wearing it all the time.
Oh yeah, your respirator. If you've got a really, if you are sensitive, it's okay to do that kind of stuff. Or if you have an N95, because it's just kind of tough right now. Anyway, so that was pleasant and uplifting. Yeah. But anyway, other than that, there's a tiny breeze, so maybe it'll dissipate earlier than they think it will. But today's Feedback Friday, well, you know who I am. I'm Kathy Hattori, Botanical Colors. And I just
finished. Did I have introduced you?
No, too late.
Okay.
Too late. I'm going to tell them who I am. I just finished shipping 35 yarn kits to everybody who's taking Porfirio's class. So if you don't get it by like Tuesday, could you please let me know? because you should get it on Monday, but just in case. So today we're going to just be talking natural dye questions, answers, all sorts of things. And Amy, you're going to cue me when I wander away on things. But before we start, I just want to say thank you to everybody. It has been a week. It has been a week. I mean, this is September 11th week. We had Labor Day. We found out that somebody knew a lot more about COVID than we thought he did, and that was really distressing. Yeah, but here we are. We're at Friday. We have a great weekend ahead of us, and we're just gonna keep working. I got all sorts of little props because people have been asking questions about things, so hopefully we'll be able to go through those. Just for housekeeping, Amy, you're not going to open up chat until the end, or you're going to open up, you're going to feed me questions, right?
Oh, this is like a whole other format today. That's right. We'll start with the questions that people actually, they
sent in. And Kathy Green, I can't find your questions, but I will answer them, okay?
Or
if I don't answer them here.
Ask them.
Yeah, and so Amy will moderate chat. I think once we get through the questions that we have, then Amy will moderate chat questions. And it's going to be low key. Don't be afraid to ask anything. And we're just going to get started. So I have this list, which Amy said she edited, but she didn't give it to me. So I'm just going to. Are you going to read the question? I'm going to answer it.
Yeah, this is like really weird just jumping in. But no presenting, no nothing. But wow.
No PowerPoint.
A whole hour of questions. Holy guacamole.
All
Heidi
right.
pumped. Okay, so and I'm also going to put my glasses on today for something new. Very severe.
Me too.
But I got to read. Kathy Hattori, question 1.
Yes.
Mordanting.
Mordanting.
Ready?
Yes,
okay.
You have
presently, to. Okay, presently I'm only dyeing cellulose fibers using alum acetate.
Yes.
Could I use the alum sulfate on
Yes.
cellulose fibers?
Yes, you may.
Okay.
So using aluminum sulfate is actually the traditional cellulose mordanting technique. So that's been used since the earth cooled. There was no aluminum acetate. It's a relatively new mordant type chemical, and it's actually used in pharmaceuticals as part of a product that's called Icy Hot. Have you ever used that? It's like it goes on really hot or cold or something, but it's for kind of like for soreness. And it's applied on your skin. So that's what aluminum acetate is. It's a derivative of that. Aluminum sulfate is the stuff that we've had since people could figure out that different minerals came out of the ground and that they had these properties that they could use for dyeing textiles. So the aluminum sulfate process includes a tannin step. So you would first dip your fabric in a tannin bath, and so you could use any tannin. You can use a dark tannin like a walnut, a red tannin like a kutch, a yellow tannin like myrobalan, pomegranate, chestnut, or a clear tannin, which is things like tara and gallnut tannin, or gallo tannins, as we call them. So any of those would be the tannin first step, and then aluminum acetate as a second separate step. We have instructions. Amy, you are going to send that around or attach it to the information that we have.
The mordanting?
We actually have a blog post on mordanting with tannin and aluminum sulfate.
Okay, great.
So Amy will point us toward that so that you have that for a reference. But the answer is yes.
Okay, I would like to know what mordanting practice you use to get the most vivid colors from flowers and leaves for eco-dyeing.
Oh, I'm so the wrong person to respond to eco-dyeing. Can we put Brees Honeycutt
I could
on
just
the spot? Did you see that look of horror?
Don't
call on me. Don't call on me.
Don't do what she said.
Brees, really, I have done, the only eco type dyeing I've done is actually with dye stuffs and never with leaves, barks, and very
somebody
rarely
else
with
on the call
flowers.
that does that. I'm
What's
not,
that?
you know, like Kathy, I didn't mordant till I really met you. True confession. So I had years of not mordant cloth.
Anybody do mordanting with eco printing? Kip, is Rochelle on this line?
Katama?
Katama?
No,
Kip?
I don't.
No, I don't think Rochelle is on. I've done a little bit. I don't do a whole lot anymore. I do mordant.
With aluminum potassium sulfate?
Yeah, for
Yeah,
for
okay.
Yeah,
protein
I mean, I think-
fibers.
Yeah, I think you just traditionally mordant. You know,
Right.
like whatever you would use for whatever cloth.
Right.
you
I think
mordant.
so. I mean, I know that there's this oh, actually, if Susie's on the Susie Forsyth.
Oh, I'm looking through the pages.
But
of
anyway,
stuff.
so you know, typically what you'll do is you'll just mordant your base fabric,
Right.
and then you put down whatever your dye stuffs are, and then you apply some level of pressure. But other people will put down other modifying, what they call a blanket, which is like basically a pre-soaked fabric that they lay on top of the you know, it's kind of like a sandwich, right? So you've got your fabric with the alum mordant on it, you've got your dye stuffs, and then you've got this other modifying blanket on top. And then after that, I have no idea what they do, because they will, I'll get emails that say, oh, I'm using XYZ blanket. And I'm thinking, what is this? But I could think that's what the concept is.
Mhm.
Anybody chime in, guys?
Kathy Green.
So Kathy,
Hey,
go
I
ahead.
always alum everything just with the regular alum, nothing fancy. Then I lay out my silk. I'm working on silk mostly, and I lay out all the leaves and flowers, but it's usually leaves. Then I use an iron blanket, so it's just a scrap of cotton that I've dipped in
Oh.
ferrous sulfate water, wrung out, and lay it on. And then I bundle it up, and then at that point I can either steam it or I can boil it in a color of dye if I want the color to go all the way through.
Ah, okay.
And I often roll it up on pieces of copper, because that brings the heat through that a wooden dowel or a stick does not.
Got
So
it.
I find that the copper is helpful in getting everything hot down to the center faster than with wood. And then I'm restless. I don't wait till the next day usually. Sometimes I do, or sometimes I can. I've never waited 3 days. I untie it, see what I've got, and then I also wash it out right away, which they tell you not to do, but I do, and it doesn't seem to matter.
Okay.
So that's
I
just
have
my
a-
experience.
Can I speak? Sorry.
Yes.
So Kathy, that's your method I use for silk. But for the linens and the really thick cottons, I actually even soak it in a very diluted iron solution. Iron as a modifier. I also use a blanket if I want really dark prints, and the blanket is also soaked in a modifier. And that's another piece of cotton. And when you do lay the blanket on top of your leaves or your vegetable matter on your cloth, make sure that you also lay those leaves on top of the iron blanket. And remember the way you face those leaves, upside down or face down. The prints are different. The inks come off from the underside mostly. So then you want that, some like that and some like that.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and my rule for silk is around 15 to 20 minutes only steaming. My rule for leaves and the thicker material and bark and stuff like that is 1.5 hours to 2 hours.
Got it.
Immersing mostly, but
Mhm.
steaming definitely up to 2 hours. But
Okay,
if I just
fantastic.
1 hour. Mhm.
Thank you so much. All right, so that was eco printing, guys.
Okay,
Well,
one more question that I have. I'm
Yes.
the person that asked this. So I put in a lot more alum. I actually mortared it for cotton rather than silk. So I put in like 4 ounces of alum into 1 liter of water, and I got the most vibrant colors, even though it says usually 12% of the
Oh
weight
yeah.
fabric.
Oh,
so
so
is there
that's
any?
yeah, that's a good point. You definitely can increase your alum, but certain fibers will react negatively to that much alum. I would say if you're working with a silk or a cellulose, but that's a lot. If you're working with a wool fiber and you over mordant it, you're going to get either stickiness or some sort of unpleasant texture on the wool. It just cannot. It's much more sensitive and reacts more to aluminum
Now
salt.
this was silk that I was doing. I was so surprised that I got, like, I did like 4 or 5 different recommended amounts, and I got the most vivid with all that alum. So I just wanted to, and it was on silk.
Definitely alum is a brightener. I mean, so if you're using potassium alum or aluminum acetate, those are highly refined. Somebody asked a question about what's the difference between the two, aluminum sulfate and aluminum potassium sulfate. So aluminum sulfate looks kind of like tiny little irregular pebbles, and aluminum potassium sulfate looks like table salt. You know, it is little tiny squares. It's super refined, and so therefore you'll get purer color yield from that than you would with, you know, like something like a Simplocos or something else that has alum as an adjunct or is not as purified. You're going to get a slightly different color shading, and you as artists, you know, you get to decide, like, what do you want to have with this? What's your goal? So that's the alum deal. But yeah, a lot of alum on a protein fiber such as a wool or an animal fiber is tough. I'd be careful with the silk. I have never used that much on silk, but I do know that there are traditions where they will do a first mordant, do a dye bath, and then they'll go back into a second mordant, a second dye bath, in order to layer on mordant colors. We know we do this with indigo, but I've also seen that with some Japanese fabrics that are just absolutely beautiful. So it does work. It's a good experiment.
Yeah, what I did was they said afterwards dry it and then do soda, baking soda, and then I dried that and then I did it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, sounds like I need to do a blog post on this, which sounds like a good.
Yeah.
Kathy,
Yes, ma'am.
Kathy, it's Helen.
Hi,
I've
Helen.
actually been experimenting with a woman from Ireland who doesn't mordant at all.
I've heard these tales, and so someday we will get a gathering of these non-mordanters and see what they're doing.
Eco printers.
I mean, it has
India
its
Plant doesn't
limits.
mordant.
It has its limits, but
Yeah.
it's interesting. And she does use an aluminum pot, and she has you put in a piece of iron.
Okay.
So
she is using a mordant, but just in a super indirect way.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. Let's go on to number 3 question.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so Kathy, is there a shelf life to natural dyes? We had at least 5 or 6 people ask this. Is there a shelf life to natural dyes?
Yes and yes.
For things like raw flower, like flowers and marigolds and okay.
Yes. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of go through the list. So I would say that flower dyes, dried flowers, whole flowers, things like that are probably the most ephemeral, right? They're going to lose, if you put a bunch of flowers in a jar and you stick them on your windowsill, you see that they start to fade. I'm assuming that any colorant that was in the petals is just also starting to fade. So if you're doing flower dyes, I would keep them, you know, away from the direct light if you want to preserve them. So those are probably the most fragile. Then things like indigo leaves. I've had this jar of indigo leaves on my shelf in direct sunlight for at least a year. It's still looking pretty good. I don't know if you can see it. Wow, it's dropping all over my keyboard. You know, for the next round of Feedback Fridays, Amy, we got to get one of those cameras that goes like this so it can look down.
I was actually just thinking of doing this when you did it.
Spotlighting. So can you see it's still pretty dark bluey green? It hasn't faded. So because indigo as a pigment is a lot more robust than other pigments, I would say that this is probably still fine. And then the next thing is raw, like hard dye stuffs, acorns, walnut hulls, pomegranate peels. All of those I would say are probably a lot more robust as well, because it's a pretty durable product and you actually have to really extract. I mean, you have to soak these things, you have to boil them. Sometimes you have to add some modifiers to them in order to extract the color. So I would say that those are probably okay. And then the last thing are things like extracts. And so extracts are actually, and then no, there's not, there's yet another last thing, which is pigments. So extracts are dye stuffs that they've taken them from their raw form, they've created a dye bath, they've strained them, they've purified them, and then they dry them. They can either dry them like in a cake and then grind them, or they can dry them with other kind of processes that are more like freeze drying that actually create a color too. And it just depends on what the technology is behind extracting. If these colors are being used for food stuff, then they typically have a more sophisticated extraction process. If they're being used for dye stuff, it tends to be fairly simple. So that's what's going on with extracts. Extracts are very shelf stable, but again, you want to keep them away from moisture, heat, and light. So store them. Some of the extracts attract moisture, and so they turn into these big clumps, and then you're like, wow, I just spent $30 on this and it's a lump. I have a technique for like figuring that out too, but I don't think I'm going to go into it right now because it involves a lot of math. But anyway, it's still usable. You can still use it. It's just, it's not as convenient. Then the final thing is a pigment. And so a pigment actually turns a dye stuff into a more inert colorant, because it bonds it to something like either a tiny little grain of some mineral that causes it. Then in order for you to use it, you actually have to kind of glue it. So when I say glue, I'm talking about things like gum arabic, casein, glare, tempera, encaustic, etc. All those things that artists use for making paints, those are the things that you use with a pigment in order to bind it to either a piece of paper or potentially a textile. Oh, soy milk. All those things have a binding quality rather than a mordant quality, which is what you use with the dye stuff. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Did that make sense? So blossoms are pretty fragile. Hard raw dye stuffs tend to be more robust. Extracts are also very, very durable, and pigments are really durable. You saw from, if you watch the Forbes collection presentation, that you know, they had pigments from 200 years old, 300 years old, and they were still fine. I mean, the jars were all dirty and stuff, but and maybe there was some fading with the more fragile ones on the outside, but the inside pigment was fine.
I'm going into indigo. I've consolidated some indigo questions for you. So
Okay.
Can a henna vat be made with the henna in the vat with the indigo at the same time, Kathy?
Yes. So the deal with henna is it's, for lack of better word, it's bulky. Like it kind of expands. If any of you have ever used henna to do mendi or henna tattoos, you start with it and it gets kind of ropey and thick and viscous. So that can take up a lot of room in your dye pot, especially if you are using a 1-2-3 vat where you also have a bunch of calcium hydroxide. So all of that adds layers and sediment into the bottom of your dye pot. That is valuable stuff, because that's where the reaction of indigo, the reducing agent, and the calcium hydroxide all are happening. But if you have a fairly small dye pot and you're using a fair amount of henna, you can always create like a henna liquid. So you would boil your henna with some water in a separate pot, and then you can strain it off and use it into add it into your 1-2-3 vat. So instead of adding the henna directly into the pot, you'd boil it with a little water, strain it off, add it in. You can still use that henna if you want, if you need to add more or reduce it again. I don't have any exact details because I've only done this a couple times, but it does help keep a lot of that sediment that tends to stick to your fabric or your yarn off of the fibers.
All right. I know I've had it, I've used it before, Kathy, and it's like big blobs were inside my vat and it was
Right.
like, I couldn't get them out of there. It was
Kind of goopy. So
it was a little bit of a disaster in my vat.
yeah, so you can
Well,
have a
not the
second
fruit
henna
cups.
bucket that you just keep kind of adding a little water to get a little bit of liquid and then pour that into your vat. And
Okay.
that helps.
So there's the fructose, there's the henna. Now somebody's asking a question about the iron.
Yeah.
So I started questioning making an iron indigo vat recently when thinking about dyeing some baby onesies. Does the iron bond to something in the process so that there's little or no iron residue in the dyed fabric?
I can't really answer that because I've never done any testing, but my experience is that I would not use an iron vat for baby clothes or children's clothes, personally. And the reason is because we were doing a project with a customer where we were dyeing t-shirts and we used an iron vat because that's what we had. And we got really weird markings as we proceeded in the dye process that indicated to me that the iron was still active. And so if the iron is still active, that means it's still on the fabric. It wasn't like the chemical process of, oh shoot, I just read about this last night too. The chemical process of creating an iron vat doesn't necessarily mean that the iron in using it as a reducing agent, I believe it turns it into iron oxide. So iron oxide is still, I mean, maybe, I think Tilka's on this call. She could maybe tell us too, but I think iron oxide is still active, that you can still get some sort of tannin iron oxide reaction, like when you're doing rust dyeing or something like that. So I would say if you can do a different vat for kids' clothes, I would do that, because what I see is that it's still active, but I can't tell you anything like how much is on there and whether or not it is considered harmful or benign to anybody. But you know, as adults, we can deal with iron, but as children, they just can't. So I wouldn't use it.
Okay. I'm in the UK and have just grown my own Japanese indigo and woad and would like to know how to extract the pigment from my indigo or be pointed to any info I could use.
There's a lot of information online, and then I think my book from John Marshall has that. Let me just look. Okay, so John Marshall has preparing pigment from cooked leaves, fermented leaves, making tsukumo, which is the Japanese method of fermenting, and how to make the vats with either tsukumo or dry leaves. And it's this book, Singing the Blues.
Kathy,
So
do we sell that book?
yes, we sell this book. Sorry. Yes, I'm not
Hey,
a
I
really
have to throw those things in. That's my job.
okay. Great. Yeah. So you could learn how to do that. It's not a difficult process. Essentially, you just take, if you're harvesting fresh, you take the leaves, you soak them in water. You'll start to see. Oh, you know who has a really great explanation of this is Rosa Chung from Indigo Shade Map. Yeah. So we'll send you that link. You can see they're harvesting, they're stripping the leaves, they're putting them in water, they're waiting for the color change in the liquid, and then what they're looking for is they aerate it in order to precipitate the pigment. Pigment falls to the bottom, They pour off the water and ba-da, they have pigment. And what pigment looks like dried is this. These are little indigo cakes from Persicaria that are super cool.
You're super cool. All right.
I'm waiting.
Okay.
Don't laugh.
Here's the natural dyes and general questions.
Yes, ma'am.
I feel like we're on a board, like a game show or something. Kathy,
Yes.
I am having trouble
For
getting
$200.
For $200, I am having trouble getting consistent results using logwood. I'm dyeing silk. I'm using alum sulfate as a mordant. I got a dark steely gray the first time using an iron modifier.
Mm-hmm.
Your face. But I've since sometimes ended up with a little brown. I've been following instructions to add a little household ammonia to change the dye bath from reddish to purple. Advice?
Yeah, so logwood is a fairly complex dye. And it's very finicky. So the thing with logwood is if you add an acid to logwood, or if you mordant, let's say you're mordanting wool yarn, if you mordant and use cream of tartar or any acid with your mordantine, and then you dye logwood, you are going to get a brown color because the acid inhibits the development of the purple shade. I think it actually even destroys it, the actual purple colorant. And also if you add too much of an alkali, like an ammonia, which I typically don't use ammonia, I typically use soda ash. If you add soda ash, sometimes you can add too much and that will also cause it to turn a brownish shade. So one of the things I've noticed with logwood, and this, as I recall, this person's using logwood chips. Is that correct? The sawdust?
Yep, it was, she
Okay.
said chips.
Yeah, so the logwood sawdust is actually, we found that it's easier to work with than the extract, believe it or not, because it's more consistent. So I'm surprised that there's this level, but definitely if you're adding iron to something, it's going to go gray or black. But if you add too much of the alkali, it could also turn it brownish. So maybe just not do any of that. Just dye it. I mean, I'm assuming the pH of your dye bath is at least 6.5 or 7. And if you leave it there, then check that and see what it looks like, and then decide if you're going to modify it. But if you have no baseline in what to compare it to, then it's hard to know where you're headed. So I would just dye something straight and then take your notes, make sure you understand that, and then the second thing you would do is add a small amount of soda ash, like 1/4%, assuming you're dyeing maybe a pound of product or ½ pound. It's a very, very tiny amount. And that will modify it slightly, and you should get a nice purple from that.
Is it possible to prepare a dye solution and store it for later? If it is, what's the best way to do that?
So most of my experiences with extracts, and so what we used to do was we would actually water bath can them. So what I mean by that is we were creating 16 ounces of water with a little bit of extract in there. We'd done a little bit of dyeing. This is often test dyeing, not big production dyeing. It's not possible to can 20 gallons of stuff unless you have a lot of mason jars. So then you just put a mason lid on it, and then you put it into a water bath canner. You process it for 15 minutes or so. And then when you bring it out, it vacuum seals. And so then therefore you don't have any more air getting into it, and you've killed any of the mold that is on the surface of the dye bath. So it typically helps keep it preserved for a period of time. We have noticed that there still was a change. Like when we would do this with our precious dyes like cochineal and weld. And so what I found with cochineal is that after a number of months, it still got kind of funky, but we used it anyway because it was so expensive, and it was fine. The one dye that we had a problem preserving was logwood, because logwood, the whole process of getting the purple color out of logwood depends on oxidation, and that oxidation continues even if you've canned it, because the water has oxygen in it and you're not removing that. You're just purifying the surface air that's between the top of the jar and the lid. So it'll continue to react and it'll lose its potency.
Okay, is it possible to use botanical dyes to sprinkle the yarn the way you do it with acid dyes, for example, or create variegated yarns?
Yes, it is. Obviously, the extracts are super concentrated, so you would have to figure out how to, if there was a way to do this so that you're not clumping a lot of dye, because then you're just wasting dye. Maybe if you mixed it with like, never mind, I'm not even going there. The other thing that we've done is we've created natural dye extract solutions. So like I was just talking about canning these things. These were actually things that we'd use to paint yarns with. So we would take a small amount of extract, we would dissolve it in water, we'd add a little bit more water. If you wanted to thicken it with a thickener, you could thicken it so that it wouldn't run. And then we would paint skeins of yarn. And I used to do this in production all day long. You can use something like like those shakers that you buy that you can sprinkle Parmesan cheese on your pizza. Those ones with they're not huge holes, but they're sort of larger than a salt shaker. You could use that with extracts as well. Just be real careful when you're doing that. I've also used things like ground matter, which is a whole dye, not an extract, on both fabric and yarn, and that works great. You could pulverize Osage more, you could pulverize logwood more, and also sprinkle those.
That's way cool. I'm gonna start doing that
Oh,
too.
it's so much fun.
Oh, that sounds like a blast.
Cochineal, if you use cochineal insects, you could pulverize those and sprinkle them.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right. We couldn't have fall without this question. Here in New England, we've got the pokeberry. I have a question about overdying fugitive pokeberry. I would like to overdye the skein I dyed with pokeberry last year and wonder how the fugitive color base will affect the overdye. What would you recommend? Said over old rose that might be stable. The fiber is merino silk rose fiber, 10%, so a small amount of cellulose.
So pokeberry, I mean, I'm using the recipe for pokeberry that I saw from Carol Lee of Hill Creek Fibers a while back. I mean, maybe 10 years ago. And I still have color on it. I used the wool yarn. I did not use, I did some on silk, and that faded faster than the wool did. But the wool still looks pretty good. And I would say that the deal with pokeberry is that the way we had to fix it was we used vinegar, and there was no mordant on it. So that means that, I mean, if you were even going to try to mordant it, I bet that it would change the color. Then if you're going to maybe like over dyeing with a cold, you wouldn't want to put heat on it because heat destroys it. Maybe if you could over dye with like a cold tannin based color, like maybe, and this would most likely be a yellow, maybe an Osage or a pomegranate, something that you could do cold and steep your fiber in it for a period of time, like a couple of days. Possibly with madder, ground madder root, because you'll get a color eventually over a number of days with ground madder.
May I interject here? This is my question.
Yeah.
I dyed last year very successfully using Carol Lee's method.
Mm-hmm.
And this year it just totally backfired.
Mm-hmm.
I have a small test skein that I've kept out in the sun for the last few days, and it's fading out very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
I think my concern is if I over dye it with something, is the pokeberry, as it fades, is it going to completely fade what I over dye it with?
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, typically when I have that much of a failure on a fugitive, I kind of just throw in the towel. I mean, I won't even try to preserve the pokeberry. What I would do is, if
No,
that, in
I
that
wanna
case, what
cover
I
it.
would do is I would just, scour it, mordant it, and dye it.
Okay.
Anything that you want, because most likely the scour process will destroy the rest of the pokeberry dye anyway.
Okay.
It's not going to fix it. And I don't think alum is effective in fixing it, right?
No.
According to Carol Lee's experiments. So yeah, I would just pretend it's not there and
Okay.
make it the color you want it to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would assume that some of that color is going to remain and affect what I over dye it with.
Yeah, and it could be really cool. I mean, you could also, so one of the things that we do when we make, when we have dye house catastrophes, which is not as often as it used to be, but it used to be pretty often, you have one t-shirt that just comes out terrible, all blotchy, terrible. We would often use that as kind of a test to do other effects on it. So we would try some sort of, freeform shibori, or try another color blend that we hadn't done before. So try to take whatever your disappointment is and turn it into something that is not just a learning experience, but something that you wouldn't probably have experimented with before. That's always a good way to go, because then you.
So you recommend scouring it well and then just starting over?
I do, yeah. I mean, if it's faded out that quickly, it's not going to stay. And,
no, and I don't want it to stay. I was very disappointed in the color.
Yeah. So
I don't know what happened this time, because last year's is just marvelous.
It could be time of year, it could be the growing conditions, it could be anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We've got one more question, then we're opening up the chat, which I think I have opened up the chat, but so you can start putting questions there and test that. I don't know why I can't. Anyways, doesn't matter. Kathy, lichen dyeing.
Lichens.
Again, so some of these questions were really long and then 6 parts or something, so I've had to edit them down. So if I haven't done this one justice, let me know. But do most types of lichen also work well with cellulose fibers as animal, and is any special process required for dyeing cellulose? This is the one that was talking about traditional, with urine being used, Kathy. The right type, yeah. Were there any alternative to ammoniac traditionally urine used?
For lichen? For extracting, I think you still need that, either the ammonia in order to extract the color. That I do know. I don't know that there's any other options. I mean, you do not need to use urine, but you should use something like ammonia. Then in terms of how do you fix it to a cellulose fiber, I'm just trying to run through, where have I ever seen lichen dyeing on a cellulose fiber? I don't know that I actually have. It typically.
I can interject here.
Yes.
I'm sorry, excuse me, but I've got experience with this kind of lichen dye.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't work real well on cellulose fibers. Right. On wool, it works marvelously.
Right.
And but cellulose, it's just going to be disappointing.
Okay. So, I mean, I would totally agree with that, and you have the experience with it, but cellulose is the most difficult thing to dye, and it's what everybody goes to, because you all have a t-shirt, or you all have a pair of socks, or it's cheap yardage, but it is the hardest to actually get great color on. And we look to the traditions of Central Asia, the Middle East, India, Indonesia. I mean, those guys are like masters in natural dyeing on cellulose. Africa, much of this is indigo based, but still they are able to get colors on cellulose that those of us who don't come from those traditions, we're not really good. And somehow it seems that lichens grow mostly in temperate climates. They don't typically grow in the same climate that cotton grows in. And so I don't know if there's much of an overlap, and maybe there's like a tannin component in the places where there is that kind of agricultural overlap of cotton growing and lichen availability, but I actually don't know anything about it.
All right. So let's see, Kate Ellis. I would like to know how to work with a lump of logwood extract that got damp. Maybe, and she's saying maybe we should make a blog post out of it, but do you want to answer that? Is there any?
The lump, yes. Okay, so here's what I do, because we used to have this problem. I mean, we still have this problem with weld. Weld extract is super expensive, and it's what they call hygroscopic, meaning that it attracts water. So if you just, like when we're dispensing weld and filling it, if we leave the spoon out, within a day, the spoon is sticky. And that means that the powder that's left on the weld, that's left on the spoon is getting gummy and sticky. And of course, that's super disappointing when you've just made that purchase. So the couple things is, if you do have powdered extract dyes, I always recommend that you keep them, like if you're going to keep it in a plastic pouch, that put that in a jar, a mason jar or a plastic jar, something that's airtight, to minimize the exposure to air and moisture. And then the second thing is, so what I do is I take that lump and I weigh it. And so if you've never opened the package and it's a lump, then you know that the lump weighs 25 grams or whatever it is that you have in the package weight. And then, you know, I just look at that and say, oh, okay, so then if this was supposed to weigh 25 grams and I've never used it, and now it weighs 35 grams, I know that 10 grams of this is water. So then I just then do my calculations based on that, right? And then if you don't do calculations at all and you just use the dye any way you want, then just use the dye any way you want. You can sometimes grind it into a paste, add a little bit more water, and it becomes a very thick paste, and then add that to your dye bath and see what you get. You know, I'm coming from the experience of having to deal with this in production. So like, we're trying to figure out how to do this, but I bought 19 pounds of goldenrod extract, and it was fused in a 5-gallon bucket. It's like a plug of concrete. And so I went back to the manufacturer. I said, what do I do with this? And they're like, oh, I guess you have to regrind it, but it's so sticky, there's no way to regrind it. So I have no way of knowing if the 19 pounds was its original weight or if the 19 pounds is its now weight. So we're just going to do some experiments and figure out what percentage of this lump makes a dark shade, a light shade, and a medium shade. So like if a 3-gram lump on 100 grams, you know, of wool, which is 3%, if that makes a dark shade, well, then I'll know, okay. So if I package it up in 25 grams, then it'll make about this much. So I do that kind of figuring out. Kate, I hope that helps. Does that make any sense? You can also dissolve your dye in a known quantity of water. Like if you use like 1,000 ml and you know you have 25 ml, and then do the same type of light, medium, and dark exploration, and just kind of see how much you actually need in order to use it. But yeah, this fiddliness is because we were in production and we had to weigh accurate amounts. But it's still good, I guess, is the most important thing. It's still fine to use. Don't throw it away, and just kind of get creative with it.
I've bundle dyed with it, but it looks like it almost looks like gunshots or something. How dark it is.
Yeah.
You're like rolling it in, like a little goes a way long way.
Yeah.
This one is an exciting question. I have mixed old nails with vinegar and the liquid started foaming. What is happening, Kathy?
That's called a chemical reaction. So vinegar and rusty nails. So whatever that is giving off a little bit of carbon dioxide, and that's what's causing the foaming. As long as it's not like overflowing into a volcano, I think you can just let it subside. And then once the reaction is done, then you can use it.
All right. Sounds like a great project for kids in school for their science experiment too. All kinds of ideas here, Kathy. All right. So longevity of cochineal, shelf life. What about freezing the bug?
If the bug is dried, okay, so if it's a whole dried bug, it has a very long shelf life, like years. It's fine. Just keep it cool and dry and away from direct light and heat. If it's ground up bugs that you've purchased, then yeah, I would almost like vacuum seal them and freeze dry them, because by grinding it, you're starting, whatever oxidation process is going to happen with that dye, it's starting. So if you, we have one of those little vacuum sealer things that we use, and yeah, I've vacuum sealed lots of stuff just to kind of keep the air out of it. You might be able to vacuum seal it and not have to refrigerate it or freeze it, but I'm pretty sure you could freeze it and it would be fine.
Okay. Kip Inglis is asking, is the fire ash in the air in the Pacific Northwest affecting your dye process?
No.
Great.
Breathing? Yes.
Breathing? Dying?
No.
You just
It's
run
not,
around and try
it's
capturing.
not like hell on earth, it's just this weird color of the sky and kind of bad taste in your mouth.
How about the shelf life of chemicals, says Nancy Nordquist, and alum acetate?
So Catherine Ellis in her book says that aluminum acetate has a shelf life, and that was all the information that was in there. And I actually went back to the manufacturer, and they're talking about a shelf life of at least 2 years. So to me, if you're using that as a mordant, typically it's pretty consumable. So I wasn't too worried about that. Aluminum sulfate, the shelf life seems to be indefinite. I mean, I've used aluminum sulfate that's over 10 years old and no problem with that. And I've never noticed a problem with aluminum acetate, but I also haven't looked for the problem. So that's all I can say about it right now.
Okay.
Oh, other things that have a shelf life. I'm looking at our shelves.
Literally looking at shelves for shelf life.
So we use things like cream of tartar, citric acid, calcium carbonate, calcium hydroxide. Again, if you keep them dry, I think they're very stable, shelf stable. Soda ash is very shelf stable. Yeah. Of the auxiliaries, those are shelf stable. I would say that if you are a indigo dyer who still uses thiourea dioxide or sodium hydrosulfite, those do have a shelf life, and it's typically like 6 to 12 months, and you have to keep it tightly closed.
Okay, Katie Smith is asking, in one of the feedback Fridays, you mentioned that sometimes you put copper pipe into dye baths. Could you explain what dye baths you are utilizing and how you use copper pipe?
Yes. So what I've noticed with so we were doing a project with a tapestry weaving group in Nepal, and they only had copper dye pots. So we had copper dye pots made to do their color development in Seattle, and then we would transfer all that technology to Nepal. What we noticed with a copper dye pot versus a stainless steel dye pot was that the purples and the reds were absolutely gorgeous. And somebody sent a chat question a few weeks ago because when I was in Alaska, we were dyeing with Copper River water. And you definitely saw that there was a change in the color yield with that water that had trace amounts of copper in it. So copper sulfate, which is a chemical that you can purchase as a mordant, is highly toxic, and so I won't use it. And I won't use verdigris either, because that's also a toxic process. But if you have a little bit of plumber's pipe that you've been saving, or like when we taught at Haystack last year, we were right next to the metal shop, and they had all these copper scraps from their jewelry making. All of that you can put in your dye pot, and it will add that trace amount of copper that then helps these reddish based dyes bloom. And you just get that little extra layer of this kind of beautiful vividness in the dye pot that I thought was quite lovely. So to me, that's the safest way of adding copper, but it's not really very exact. But I think that's part of the excitement of it.
Mhm. Okay, I asked somebody, blah, 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 blah. Kathy, I asked the question about sprinkling the yarn. Thanks. What do you do after? Do you boil it? Do you steam it?
Steam it.
Steam it up.
If you boil it, your dye is going to dissipate. I mean, that could be totally beautiful too, but I always steam it.
So you wrap it. So I'm sorry, I'm the one I forgot to say. Do you wrap it in something so it doesn't dissolve and you steam it? You steam it like you do with the acid dyes, that you wrap it in foil.
I wouldn't wrap it in foil. You could wrap. I try not to wrap stuff in plastic wrap, but you could wrap it in plastic wrap.
I know someone who would do it and wrap it in plastic wrap and put it in a microwave.
Yep, I've done that too. Lots. Lots. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe this is the last question from Elaine Hamblin. Let's see. Suggestion for dyeing Sally Fox cotton knit with marigolds besides inviting us both over to do it?
Yeah. Where are you?
What? Yeah.
We'll be there. I'll bring my
do that.
mask.
Let's go to Elaine Hamblin's house. All 133 of us. Let's do this.
Sally Fox's cotton, God, it's so beautiful. Like her naturally colored cotton takes color so beautifully. Yeah, I would just, definitely you have to scour it. Scour and mordant. You can mordant either, the cotton actually has a tiny bit of tannin in it already.
Okay.
But you could use a tannin alum, you could use an aluminum acetate. Kind of depends on the post, if you want to use calcium carbonate or wheat bran, depending on kind of, with marigolds, try the calcium carbonate. Yeah, calcium carbonate. And then fresh marigolds or dried marigolds?
I have both. I'll probably experiment with both.
Yeah. It's going to be beautiful. It's really rich gold color. It'll be very pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Kathy, it's 1 o'clock.
No.
Yeah. You just went that fast. 1 hour.
Oh my God.
Reese Honeycutt is in awe of you and your knowledge base.
Well, wait, I'm looking at the chat.
Yeah, there's 17 more or so things here, but.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go through this.
Oh boy.
Somebody asked me about painting and how to do the alum solution. I did a recipe for that. It's somewhere in the blog, Amy, so we could.
Painting?
Yeah. Someone who's using lemon juice, citric acid, which is in lemon juice, will discharge many, many dyes. So if you are having a seafood fest, do not wear your logwood to that. The way that we've repaired that is we actually will put it in a light ammonia solution, like soak the garment in a little bit of a very light ammonia solution, and it helps restore it. Catherine Alice shows that in her book. Yes, indigo is impervious to those kinds of things, but logwood, madder, anything that is a mordant dye typically has some sensitivity to pH. Let's see, who else?
There's somebody who-
Adriana, I cannot answer your question about purple cabbage because I've never dyed with purple cabbage before, but perhaps we can open that up to the group and add this to our blog, and maybe somebody can answer it on the
I think
blog.
Sasha Doer would have
Yeah.
something on that too, and in her book, which again,
Okay.
still, but she doesn't like talk about the process, but her website I think has something on it.
Kate, Alice, in terms of stock solution, I have some percentages I can give you to make you give a light, medium, dark, and then do any type of blending. Okay, that was quick.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, somebody asked about the life of indigo extract. Indigo is very long lived. If you have it in a powder form, if you have it in like this cake form, this will last for a long time, many years. So if you have 2 or 3 year old indigo extract and you're just getting into indigo, you should be fine. The biggest thing to think about when working with indigo is that in some cases, indigo providers have different finenesses of the powder. So some of it's quite gritty. Some of them actually provide it in chips or chunks or cakes like this. All of this has to be ground down into a very fine powder before you use it. Otherwise, you won't get the color yield that you're expecting. Okay, I'm done.
Well, you want to talk about what's happening next week?
Oh yeah, next week. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for that little nudge. So next week we have Babs Behan from Botanical Ink. She's from the, she did the Bristol cloth project where she used flocks of sheep that were in the region of her area of I believe it's southwest England.
Yeah.
And she helped revitalize the Bristol textile mill, which is a weaving mill, and did this beautiful Bristol cloth that I actually have 2 meters of, and I'm going to bring it next week because it's the most beautiful fabric. I believe they're still selling it, or they're taking pre-orders for.
I put the RSVP up already, Kathy, and I embedded the video. Beautiful
yeah,
video.
it's just
Shows it and
beautiful.
how to shop
So
it.
they use madder. They dyed the first round with madder and the second round with fustic, and it's mostly a natural colored. It looks like a two-tie type of weave. You know, that beautiful kind of diagonal diamondy shape thing that's going on with some stripes. It's super beautiful, and yeah, this is going to be a treat.
She's going to be talking about opening. I talked with her the other day. She's offering yardage of it as well as like beautiful scarves and stuff too. So it's a whole new round of yardage she's opening up. And that's in the RSVP post right now. Yeah,
so she's great. She's joining us from Bristol, England, which is exciting. It'll be evening there. And yeah, that's going to be good. So don't miss that. What else?
Eco printing too. My first eco printing class was with her.
Oh yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, so yeah, she wrote this book, Botanical Inks. We have that on our, we have it on our site. I'm also the storeroom for the online shopping, so I just kind of look around to see what we have in stock here. All right. Thank you everyone for such a great.
Thank you, Kathy. You're the one who, you guys can unmute yourselves and let's clap for Kathy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to be able to see everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Kathy.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye.
Hi, Christine. How are you? Hi,
Very
Erica.
well.
Good. See you, Breeze Honeycutt. My eyes are on you. My eyes are on you.
Uh-oh.
Now they're on you here. Now they're on you there.
Uh-oh.
There.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Hey, can you come by Hancock on Saturday?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes,
there's
I will be in Shelburne Falls on Saturday. If anybody wants in Massachusetts, if anybody wants to come meet me at a cool weaving mill.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, can we start driving now?
You want to
Yes.
stop at
Not
Hancock?
far from Greece
Start
Honeycutt,
now.
Hancock Baker Village.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah.
like what?
Anybody yeah. Oh yeah. We're going old school weaving mills.
Oh my God.
I'm not going. I'll be at Hancock.
Is Porfirio still here?
Porfirio's here?
Yeah, he was.
He was? I couldn't see. I know we have a
We have a Zoom meeting with him.
with him in a little bit.
Where'd
I
he
can't
go?
see him. I can just see everybody's names quickly moving on me.
Yeah.
I always like when people say that they were here and I didn't know that they were here.
It's because there's too many pages.
My aunt was here last week.
Is your mom on today?
No, my mother is not.
There's
There's Tilka finally deciding to say.
Hello. Hi, Erica.
Yeah, we could have pulled Tilka in for some pigment questions there. That's great to know that you were there for real. I could not find her. I was looking.
No, I saw Tilka's name, so I knew she was here.
It was mostly me.
We're camped out in our friend's garage because the smoke's so bad in our town.
Oh no.
Oh.
Yeah, it's real bad.
Sorry, guys.
Hopefully getting better.
Hopefully. There's hardly a breeze though.
Yes, I played.
Today's supposed to be the worst day. It's supposed to get better.
Yeah. Well, it feels like fall here on Cape Cod, and it's
freezing here in Cambridge. Freezing.
yeah, a little maybe ragweed in the air. Every time you cough or sneeze, you say, "I don't have it. I don't have it." Like that. Like the neighbors care. You're that far away. Like, I swear I don't have it.
My test was negative.
I've been tested. Yeah. Well,
my auntie had to have 3 COVID tests.
Oh my gosh. I feel like we should do these like once a month, just like.
Bye, Suzanne. Thank you for the dance interpretation.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. I can't wait till I can come out and dance in person before one of your classes.
Oh, that'd be good.
Can you imagine when we have like a get together and we just play Feedback Friday in person and we all just dance,
rock
and
out? Yes.
Laugh.
It will be quite embarrassing.
It'll be so good embarrassing.
When are you going to Western Mass for the weaving?
I will be there at noon tomorrow. Bedfellows Blankets, Shelburne Falls. Yeah. Shelburne Falls?
Ooh, they make blankets?
Oh yeah. For a lot of different states. There's like
Is it like Pendleton?
She can do all kinds of different things. She actually has a really great book on wool too. I know there's more than just the word wool, but it's a really fascinating book on wool. So she wrote it. She has all these old weaving machines, and I'm going with a designer to meet her to see if she can make a really cool vest, like a vintage workwear vest.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Out of wool.
Yeah.
Cool.
With Taylor, Gamine Workwear. We'll be there.
Oh, how is Taylor doing? Good?
She's doing great. Yeah.
Good.